The warning signals came at dawn. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiant, watching red lights flash across every screen. His coffee cup shook in his hand as the ship's communication system crackled to life. "All human vessels, this is Coalition Command," the voice said. It was cold and official. "Report to designated evacuation points immediately. This is not a drill." Jake set down his cup and looked at his crew. They all had the same confused expression. Navigation Officer Pete Davis turned from his station. "Captain, what's happening?" Before Jake could answer, another message came through. This one was different. It was Admiral Lisa Banks, the highest-ranking human in the Coalition military. Her face appeared on the main screen and she looked tired. "Jake, I need you to listen carefully," she said. "The Void Swarm is coming. They've awakened after 1,000,000 years of sleep. The Coalition has made a decision." She paused, and Jake could see pain in her eyes. "They're abandoning Earth." The bridge went silent. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "What do you mean, abandoning Earth?" "The Military Council voted," Lisa continued. "Earth is too far from the core systems. They say it can't be defended. All human personnel are ordered to evacuate to the inner worlds. Earth and the colonies are being written off." Jake's hands clenched into fists. Behind him, he heard one of his crew members curse softly. Earth wasn't just their home planet. It was where billions of humans lived. It was where Jake's parents had died and been buried. It was everything. "The evacuation ships are already on their way," Lisa said. "You have 48 hours to reach the pickup points." "I'm sorry, Jake. I fought this decision, but I lost." The transmission ended. Jake stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Around him, his crew waited for orders. They trusted him to know what to do. But for the first time in his career, Jake had no idea. "Captain?" Pete asked quietly. Jake turned to look at each of them. These people had followed him through dangerous missions. They had trusted him with their lives. Now he had to make the hardest choice of his career. "Set course for Luna Base," he said finally. The journey to Luna Base took 12 hours. During that time, Jake received dozens of messages from other human ships. Some captains were following orders and heading to the evacuation points. Others were asking the same question Jake was asking himself. How could they just leave? When the Defiant docked at Luna Base, Jake found the place in chaos. Half the personnel were packing to leave. The other half were arguing about what to do. In the middle of it all stood Commander Alex Turner. Alex was a tough man who had served in the outer colonies for most of his career. He had seen things that would give most people nightmares. When he saw Jake, he walked over with a grim expression. "Heard you got the news," Alex said. "Yeah," Jake replied. "You following orders?" Alex laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Follow orders? They want us to run away and let Earth burn. That's not following orders. That's cowardice." Jake looked around the base. "What are you planning?" "Chief Engineer Katie Walsh has been running numbers," Alex said. "We've got automated defense platforms throughout the system. We've got mining operations in the asteroid belt. We've got 300 ships of various sizes. It's not much, but it's something." "Against the Void Swarm?" Jake asked. "Alex, these things destroyed entire civilizations. The Coalition has been running from them." "Then maybe it's time someone stopped running," said a new voice. They turned to see Marine Colonel Rick Carter walking toward them. Rick was a big man with scars on his face from a dozen battles. He looked angry. "I've been reading the reports," Rick continued. "The Void Swarm attacks in predictable patterns. They expect organized resistance. They expect enemies who fight by the rules. Well, humans don't always follow the rules." Katie Walsh joined them, carrying a data pad full of calculations. She was small and quiet, but Jake knew she was one of the smartest engineers in the fleet. "I've been looking at our resources," she said. "If we strip the mining equipment and convert the civilian ships, we can put together a defense force. It won't be pretty, but it might work." Jake thought about Admiral Banks. She was probably on her way to the inner worlds, following orders like a good soldier. He thought about his crew waiting for him to make a decision. He thought about Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. "How long do we have?" he asked. Alex checked his watch. "Void Swarm scouts will reach the outer system in 36 hours. The main force will be here in 3 days. And the evacuation ships? They'll be gone in 24 hours, Katie said. Anyone who stays after that is on their own. Jake nodded slowly. He had made his choice, but he needed to give his crew the same chance. "I'm going back to my ship. I need to talk to my people." An hour later, Jake stood in the Defiant's main cargo bay. His entire crew was there, waiting. He looked at each face and saw fear, confusion, and determination. "You all heard the orders," he began. "The Coalition wants us to evacuate. They're writing off Earth and everyone on it. I want to give each of you a choice. The evacuation ships leave in 23 hours. Anyone who wants to go should go. No shame in that. No questions asked." He paused and took a deep breath. "But I'm staying. Commander Turner and Colonel Carter are organizing a defense. It's probably suicide. The Void Swarm has never been beaten, but I can't run away and let Earth die without a fight." The cargo bay was quiet for a long moment. Then Pete Davis stepped forward. "I'm staying too, Captain," he said. One by one, the rest of the crew joined him. Jake felt a surge of pride and terror. These people were going to die because they trusted him. But maybe, just maybe, they would make the Void Swarm pay for every inch. That night, Jake stood in the observation deck and looked out at Earth. It was beautiful and peaceful, with clouds swirling over blue oceans. In less than 3 days, alien ships would come to destroy it. Behind him, the door opened. Alex Turner walked in and stood beside him. "Second thoughts?" Alex asked. "Every minute," Jake admitted. "But I keep thinking about something my grandfather told me. He fought in the old wars on Earth. He said the thing about humans is that we're too stupid to know when we're beaten." Alex smiled grimly. Let's hope he was right. Outside the window, the first stars were appearing. Somewhere out there, the Void Swarm was coming, and for the first time in a million years, they were going to meet an enemy that refused to run. The first Void Swarm ships appeared like dark crystals against the stars. Lieutenant Ben Foster watched them through his binoculars from a crater on Luna's surface. The alien vessels moved in perfect formation, their surfaces reflecting light in strange patterns. "How many?" asked Sergeant Roy Mitchell, crouching beside him. 12 scout ships," Ben replied. "Just like the intelligence report said. They're setting up for the main invasion." Ben's squad had been hiding in the lunar caves for 2 days. They were Marines trained for ground combat, but now they were fighting in spacesuits on an airless moon. It wasn't what they had trained for, but humans were good at adapting. The Void Swarm ships landed near the old mining facility. Ben watched as crystalline creatures emerged from the ships. They moved like insects, but they were the size of trucks. Their bodies were made of some kind of living crystal that sparkled in the sunlight. "Remember what Colonel Carter said," Ben whispered into his radio. "These things expect us to fight like the other alien races. They expect organized resistance and predictable tactics. We're going to give them something different." Ben's plan was simple and crazy. Instead of attacking the ships directly, his squad would use the mining tunnels to get close. Then they would collapse the tunnels and bury the entire landing site. It took them 3 hours to crawl through the old mining shafts. The tunnels were dark and cramped, and the suits made everything harder. But humans had been crawling through dangerous places for thousands of years. It was what they did. When they reached the position under the landing site, Ben's demolitions expert, Corporal Lisa Adams, set the charges. She had learned her job blowing up buildings on Earth, but the principles were the same. "Charges set," she whispered. "This is going to bring down half the mountain." "Good," Ben replied. "Any other species would call this suicide. But we're from a planet that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We know how to die hard." The explosion shook the entire moon. Tons of rock and metal came crashing down on the Void Swarm landing site. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but a crater. Back on the UNS Defiant, Captain Jake Morrison watched the explosion through the ship's sensors. Communications Officer Dan Moore turned from his station with a grin. "Direct hit, Captain. The entire enemy landing force is buried." Jake nodded, but he knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the main Void Swarm fleet arrived. That test came 18 hours later. 300 alien ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. They were massive things like floating cathedrals made of black crystal. Intelligence reports said each ship carried thousands of warriors. "They're moving toward Earth," reported Pete Davis from his navigation station. "Standard attack formation." Jake studied the enemy formation on his tactical display. The aliens were advancing in neat rows like soldiers on parade. It was exactly what the coalition forces would have done. It was also exactly what Jake had been hoping for. "All ships, this is Morrison," he said into his communicator. "Execute Plan Chaos." Plan Chaos was something no military academy would have taught. Instead of meeting the enemy in organized battle, the human ships scattered throughout the asteroid belt. They would strike from hiding. then disappear before the aliens could respond. Chief Engineer Katie Walsh had spent days preparing for this moment. She had turned every piece of space junk in the system into a weapon. Old mining equipment became missiles. Chunks of asteroid became kinetic bombs. Even garbage could kill when it hit at the right speed. The first Void Swarm ship to enter the asteroid belt was a cruiser the size of a city. It moved slowly and confidently, scanning for enemies. It never saw the cargo container full of mining explosives that Katie had hidden on a drifting asteroid. The explosion tore the alien ship in half. Before the other ships could react, more containers detonated throughout the belt. In minutes, the organized alien formation turned into chaos. "They're trying to regroup," reported Dan Moore. "Don't let them," Jake ordered. "All ships, attack pattern random. No formation, no plan. Just hit them and run." What followed was the strangest space battle in galactic history. Human ships darted through the asteroid field like angry wasps, attacking from every direction. They used tactics that made no sense to military strategists, but were perfectly natural to humans who had learned warfare on a planet full of predators. Captain Morrison's ship dove through the debris field of a destroyed alien vessel, using the wreckage as cover. Pilot Grace Sullivan flew her fighter through a gap so narrow that her wingtips scraped crystal, then fired missiles at point-blank range before spinning away. The Void Swarm tried to adapt, but their tactics were based on facing organized enemies. They had conquered hundreds of worlds by defeating proper military forces. They had no idea how to fight an enemy that seemed completely insane. On Earth's surface, things were even stranger. Mayor Frank Stone had organized the civilian population into resistance cells. When the first Void Swarm dropships landed in North America, they expected to face a panicked population. Instead, they found humans who used blizzards as weapons. The alien crystal warriors could survive in space, but they had trouble with Earth's extreme weather. When their ships landed in Alaska during a winter storm, they found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see through snow and ice. In Africa, other landing forces discovered that humans could fight in heat that would kill most aliens. In the Amazon, they learned that humans could move through terrain that would trap anyone else. In every environment on Earth, the aliens found humans who were perfectly adapted to local conditions. Dr. Amy Clark worked frantically in a medical station deep underground. She was treating wounded soldiers and civilians, but she was also making discoveries. Human adrenaline allowed people to keep fighting with injuries that would drop any other species. Human pain tolerance was beyond anything in medical textbooks. "This soldier has 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung," she told her assistant. "He walked 2 miles carrying another wounded man. Any alien would have died from shock." The assistant, a young medic named Paul Wright, shook his head in amazement. "How is that possible?" "Because we come from a world that tried to kill us every day," Amy replied. "Our bodies learned to keep working no matter what." As the battle raged, a pattern emerged. The Void Swarm had expected to fight the humans like they had fought every other species. They expected organized resistance, predictable tactics, and enemies who would break when faced with superior force. Instead, they found an enemy that seemed to get stronger when things got worse. They found fighters who used their own planet as a weapon. They found a species that had spent millions of years learning to survive against impossible odds. By the end of the first day, the Void Swarm had lost 30 ships and thousands of warriors. The humans had lost 12 ships and were running low on ammunition. But they were still fighting, and the aliens were starting to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. Colonel Rick Carter stood in the ruins of a bombed-out city, watching alien reinforcements land in the distance. His Marines were tired, wounded, and outnumbered, but they were still human, and humans didn't know how to quit. "Sir," said one of his sergeants, "what are our orders?" Rick checked his weapon and smiled grimly. "Same as always, Sergeant. We make them pay for every inch. We show them what happens when you mess with Deathworlders." In space, Captain Morrison watched more alien ships approaching. His fleet was battered and his crew was exhausted. But they had proven something important. The Void Swarm could be hurt. They could be confused. And if they could be confused, maybe they could be beaten. The real war was just beginning. Admiral Lisa Banks stood in the Coalition Command Center on the Altarian homeworld, staring at reports that made no sense. According to the data streams, humans were not only surviving the Void Swarm attack, but actually winning battles. "This cannot be accurate," said Fleet Commander Zarthul, his blue skin darkening with disbelief. "No species has ever defeated Void Swarm forces in direct combat." Lisa studied the tactical displays showing the Sol system. Red dots marked void swarm positions, while blue dots showed human forces. There were far fewer blue dots, but they kept moving in ways that defied military logic. The reports are confirmed by 3 independent monitoring stations, she said quietly. The humans are using unconventional tactics. Unconventional? Zarthul's voice carried the typical Altarian disdain. You mean primitive and disorganized. They will be destroyed within days. Lisa wanted to argue, but she had no way to explain what she was seeing. The human tactics looked insane from a military perspective. Ships scattered instead of forming battle lines. Ground forces used guerrilla warfare instead of organized defense. It should have been a disaster. Back in the Sol system, Dr. Amy Clark worked in what had once been a shopping mall. The building had been converted into a field hospital, with wounded soldiers lying on makeshift beds between empty stores. The smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke from burning buildings outside. Doctor, we need you in Trauma Bay 3, called Nurse Jenny Parker. Rushing past with medical supplies, Amy hurried to where a young Marine lay unconscious. His name tag read Collins, and his injuries were severe. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a concussion that should have killed him. But his vital signs were stable, and he was mumbling orders to his squad even while unconscious. How is this possible? Asked Dr. Marcus Webb, a civilian doctor who had volunteered. According to medical textbooks, he should be in shock and dying. Amy checked the Marine's blood work on her portable scanner. His adrenaline levels are off the charts, but his system is processing it normally. His pain receptors are active, but his brain is compartmentalizing the signals. It's like his body was designed for this kind of trauma. Outside the hospital, the sound of explosions continued. The Void Swarm had landed thousands of troops in the city, but the human defenders refused to break. Instead of retreating to prepared positions, they turned every building into a fortress and every street into a trap. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking at damage reports. His ship had been in continuous combat for 5 days. The hull was cracked, the engines were running at dangerous levels, and they were down to their last missile. Captain, said Communications Officer Dan Moore, we're receiving a surrender demand from the Void Swarm flagship. Jake almost laughed. The aliens still didn't understand what they were dealing with. Send them our reply. Dan grinned and opened a channel. This is Captain Morrison of the UNS Defiant. Your surrender is accepted. Please prepare to be boarded. The bridge crew managed weak smiles despite their exhaustion. It was a human joke, but it carried a serious message. Humans didn't surrender. It wasn't in their nature. Chief Engineer Katie Walsh emerged from the engine room, her uniform stained with oil and sweat. Captain, I've got the engines stable, but we can't take much more punishment. How long can we keep fighting? Jake asked. Katie considered the question. In normal conditions? The ship should have been destroyed 3 days ago, but I've been improvising, rerouting power, bypassing damaged systems, using spare parts in ways they were never designed for. Maybe another day or 2. It was a perfect example of human engineering. Other species built ships that worked perfectly under ideal conditions. Humans built ships that could be held together with spare wire and stubborn determination. On the lunar surface, Lieutenant Ben Foster's squad had been fighting for a week. They had started with 12 Marines. Now they were down to 6, but they had destroyed 15 enemy positions and were still mobile. Sarge, whispered Private Tony Adams, we're almost out of ammunition. Sergeant Roy Mitchell checked his weapon. Then we use rocks. Then we use our hands. Then we use our teeth. The enemy needs to learn what happens when they corner a human. Roy's attitude was typical of Earth's defenders. Logic said they should be dead by now. Mathematics said they were outnumbered and outgunned. But humans had never been good at accepting what logic and mathematics told them. The turning point came when Commander A. Alex Turner launched what military historians would later call the most reckless assault in space warfare history. His target was a Void Swarm mothership, a massive vessel that served as the enemy's command center. The plan violated every rule of space combat. Instead of attacking from long range with missiles, Turner's ships would charge straight at the enemy vessel and ram it. The ships were loaded with nuclear warheads that would detonate on impact. This is suicide, said his second-in-command, Major Carroll Davis. No, Turner replied calmly. Suicide is giving up. This is just aggressive problem-solving. 20 human ships accelerated toward the mothership at maximum speed. The Void Swarm defenders tried to stop them, but the human pilots flew like madmen. They corkscrewed through defensive fire, used asteroid chunks as shields, and kept coming no matter what. Pilot Grace Sullivan was in the lead fighter. Her ship was shot full of holes, her left engine was dead, and her life support was failing, but she kept flying because that's what humans did. When her targeting system failed, she aimed by instinct. When her missiles ran out, she prepared to ram. "This is for Earth," she said into her radio, and drove her fighter straight into the mothership's bridge. The explosion could be seen from 3 planets. When the light faded, the Void Swarm mothership was a drifting wreck. But the cost had been terrible. 19 human ships and their crews were gone. On Earth, the news of the victory spread quickly, but it came with a price that was becoming clear to everyone. The planet's ecosystem was collapsing under the strain of total war. Factories that once made cars now made ammunition. Farms that once grew food now produced chemicals for explosives. Mayor Frank Stone stood in what had been Central Park, now a refugee camp for displaced civilians. The trees were gone, cut down for defensive positions. The lakes were polluted with runoff from weapons factories. The sky was gray with smoke. "How much more can we take?" asked City Councilwoman Helen Brooks. Frank looked at the faces around him. They were tired, hungry, and scared, but they were also determined. These people had watched their world burn, and they were still fighting. "As much as we have to," he said simply. "That's what humans do." In space, Captain Morrison received word that more Void Swarm fleets were approaching. The enemy was bringing everything they had. The final battle was coming, and humanity was running out of ships, ammunition, and time. But they were also learning. Every battle taught them more about their enemy. Every victory, no matter how costly, proved that the Void Swarm could be beaten. Dr. Julie Kim, working from a hidden research station, had been studying captured enemy technology. "I think I understand how they communicate," she told Morrison over an encrypted channel. "It's a quantum entanglement network." "If we could disrupt it?" "You mean jam their communications?" Morrison asked. "More than that. I mean confuse their entire command structure, make them think orders are coming from places they're not, turn their organization against itself." It was a typically human solution. Instead of matching the enemy's technology, they would corrupt it. Instead of fighting the Void Swarm's strength, they would turn it into weakness. The war was far from over. The enemy was bringing massive reinforcements. Earth was dying under the strain of constant battle. But humanity had learned something important about themselves. They were survivors. They were fighters. And they were too stubborn to know when they were beaten. Colonel Rick Carter stood on a hill overlooking a burning city. His Marines were dug in around him, preparing for the next assault. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from supplies. By any reasonable standard, they should surrender. Instead, Carter checked his weapon and smiled. "Listen up, Marines," he called out. "The enemy thinks they've got us cornered. They think we're going to break. They don't understand that humans don't break. We just get angrier." The Marines laughed grimly. They knew they might die in the next few hours. But they also knew they would make the enemy pay for every inch of ground. That was the human way. That was the Deathworlder way. The distress signal came from the mining colony of New Arizona, 3 star systems away from Earth. Commander Steve Parker read the message with growing amazement. The Void Swarm had attacked their world, expecting easy conquest. Instead, they had run into 2,000 stubborn miners and farmers who refused to die quietly. "How are they holding out?" asked his second-in-command, Lieutenant Mike Rodriguez. Steve looked at the tactical data. According to this, they're using industrial mining equipment as artillery. They've turned the whole planet into one big trap. The situation on New Arizona showed that human resistance wasn't limited to Earth. Wherever humans had settled, they brought their Deathworld mentality with them. Foreman Carl Brooks had organized the mining community into a fighting force that used the planet's brutal dust storms as cover for guerrilla attacks. "The enemy expects us to fight like civilized people," Carl told his team over the radio. "Well, we're not civilized. We're miners. We know how to work in places that want to kill us." The Void Swarm forces on New Arizona were learning what the Sol system defenders already knew. Humans were impossible to predict. When cornered, they became more dangerous, not less. When outnumbered, they got creative. When facing certain death, they got stubborn. On the research outpost Kepler Station, Dr. Julie Kim made a breakthrough that would change everything. Working with communications specialist Dan Moore, she had been studying captured void swarm technology for weeks. "I think I figured out their weakness," she told the station commander over a secure channel. "Their hive mind depends on quantum communication. If we can inject false signals into their network," Dan looked up from his console. "You mean we can make them think they're getting orders that aren't real?" "Better than that," Julie replied with excitement. "We can make different parts of their fleet think they're getting contradictory orders. Turn their organization into chaos." It was a breakthrough that only humans could have made. Other species would have tried to match void swarm technology or find ways to block it. Humans characteristically chose to corrupt it instead, turning the enemy's greatest strength into a weakness, the B. First test came during a battle near the asteroid mining station series. Captain Morrison's fleet was badly outnumbered when a void swarm task force arrived, but this time they had Julie's new jamming technology. "Activate the confusion protocol," Morrison ordered. What happened next amazed even the human crews. The void swarm ships began firing on each other. Their formation broke apart as different units received contradictory orders. Some ships tried to retreat while others advanced. The perfect coordination that made them so dangerous collapsed into chaos. "It's working," reported Communications Officer Dan Moore. "Half their fleet thinks they're supposed to be attacking the other half." The victory at Ceres proved that humanity's resistance was becoming more than just desperate survival. They were learning to use their enemy's technology against them. More importantly, word of their successes was spreading throughout human space. On the frontier world of Kepler Prime, Colonial Administrator Beth Williams received Morrison's tactical data. Her world had no military ships and only a small defense force. But they had something else: 3 million humans who had spent generations learning to survive on a planet with hostile wildlife and deadly weather. "The void swarm is coming here next," she told the Colonial Council. "We have 2 weeks to prepare." "What can we do against a space fleet?" asked Councilman Jerry Roberts. Beth smiled grimly. "We do what humans always do. We adapt, improvise, and make them sorry they messed with us." When the void swarm arrived at Kepler Prime, they expected to find a defenseless agricultural world. Instead, they found farmers who had turned their crop-dusting aircraft into fighters, ranchers who used their cattle herds to trample landing sites, and construction workers who had built massive catapults that could launch boulders into orbit. The battle for Kepler Prime became legendary. The colonists used every resource on their planet as a weapon. They redirected rivers to flood enemy positions. They set wildfires that spread across continents. They even used the planet's dangerous wildlife, driving herds of carnivorous beasts toward alien landing zones. Back in Coalition space, Admiral Lisa Banks watched the reports with growing amazement. The humans weren't just surviving the void swarm attacks. They were winning. More incredibly, they were doing it using tactics that no military academy had ever taught. "This is impossible," said Fleet Commander Zarthul, reading the latest intelligence reports. "How can a primitive species defeat forces that conquered half the galaxy?" Lisa studied the tactical analyses. The human successes weren't accidents. They showed clear patterns of adaptation and innovation. "They're not primitive," she said quietly. "They're different. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day. It made them into natural survivors." "Survivors, perhaps," Zarthul replied dismissively. "But they cannot win a galactic war with primitive tactics." Lisa wasn't so sure. The more she studied human combat methods, the more she understood why they were effective. The Void Swarm had conquered other civilizations by defeating their organized military forces. But humans didn't fight like other civilizations. They fought like desperate survivors who refused to accept defeat. The proof came when news arrived that shocked the entire coalition. Human forces had launched an offensive. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack, they were taking the fight to Void Swarm strongholds. Captain Morrison's expanded fleet had grown from desperate survivors into a mobile strike force. They hit enemy supply bases, destroyed communication relays, and rescued human colonies under attack. They moved fast, struck hard, and disappeared before the enemy could respond. "We're not defending anymore," Morrison told his fleet commanders. "We're hunting. The Void Swarm wants a war. We'll give them one they'll never forget." The human offensive used every lesson learned during the defense of Earth. They struck from unexpected directions, used civilian technology as weapons, and turned every battle into chaos that favored their adaptability over alien organization. On the industrial world of New Detroit, Chief Engineer Katie Walsh led a team that converted automobile factories into shipbuilding facilities. They couldn't match Coalition technology, but they built ships that were tough, reliable, and designed for the kind of brutal combat that humans specialized in. These ships won't win any beauty contests, Katie told her workers, but they'll keep flying when prettier ships are scrap metal. The human war effort was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of a centralized military, it was a network of independent communities that shared information and resources while maintaining local control. It was organized chaos, and it was devastatingly effective. Dr. Amy Clark had established a mobile medical service that moved between battle zones. Her teams treated wounded soldiers and civilians, but they also collected data on human performance under extreme stress. What they found amazed even her. Human physiology is adapting to combat conditions, she reported to Morrison. Adrenaline tolerance is increasing. Pain sensitivity is decreasing. Some soldiers are showing enhanced reflexes and improved coordination under stress. You mean we're evolving? Morrison asked. In real time, Amy confirmed. The human body is responding to extreme selective pressure by becoming more efficient at survival. It's like watching evolution in fast forward. The war was changing humanity in ways no one had expected. They were becoming harder, faster, and more dangerous. But they were also becoming more unified. The abandoned colonies that had once competed for resources now worked together against a common enemy. On the mining world of Titan Station, Governor Sandra Kelly organized a resistance network that spanned 12 star systems. Her communications system used modified mining equipment to send coded messages faster than official coalition channels. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, she told her cell leaders. We're fighting to prove that humans deserve a place in this galaxy, and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. The Void Swarm was learning that they had made a terrible mistake. They had expected to fight the humans like they had fought every other species. Instead, they had awakened something that refused to follow the rules of galactic warfare. Colonel Rick Carter stood in the ruins of what had been a Void Swarm command post. His Marines had taken it using tactics that combined ancient siege warfare with modern technology. Around him, alien equipment burned while his soldiers searched for intelligence. Sir, said Sergeant Roy Mitchell, what's our next target? Rick looked at his tactical display, which showed dozens of potential objectives. The humans were no longer reacting to enemy moves. They were making their own plans, setting their own objectives, and forcing the Void Swarm to respond to them. All of them, he said with a grim smile. We're going to hit them everywhere at once. We're going to show them what happens when you back Deathworlders into a corner. The galaxy was about to learn that abandoning humanity had been the Coalition's greatest mistake. The Deathworlders were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. The message reached Coalition Command just as the Void Swarm main fleet entered Altarian space. Admiral Lisa Banks read it twice before she could believe what it said. Human relief force en route. Estimated arrival 6 hours. Prepare for joint operations. Fleet Commander Zarthel's blue skin had turned almost gray with fear. Through the command center's windows, they could see the approaching enemy fleet. 3,000 Void Swarm ships blotted out the stars, moving toward the Coalition's most important world. How can humans help us? Zarthel asked desperately. Their fleet was destroyed defending Earth. Lisa studied the incoming tactical data. The human force was smaller than she had expected, but something about their approach made her heart race with hope. They weren't advancing in neat formation like Coalition fleets. They moved like a pack of hunting wolves spreading out to surround their prey. Because they've been fighting this enemy for months, she replied. They've learned how to win. 6 star systems away, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the rebuilt UNS Defiant. His fleet had grown from desperate survivors into battle-hardened veterans. They had fought their way across human space, liberating colonies and destroying enemy strongholds. All ships, this is Morrison, he said into his communicator. Today we're not fighting for survival. We're fighting to save the galaxy. The Coalition abandoned us when we needed help. Now they need us. Time to show them what Deathworlders can do. The human fleet that entered Altarian space looked nothing like the organized formations that Coalition militaries favored. These ships bore scars from dozens of battles. They were painted with kill marks and personal decorations. They moved with the confidence of predators who had learned their prey's weaknesses. Leading the assault was Colonel Rick Carter's Marine Force, now expanded into a full division. His dropships dove through the enemy formation like bullets, using chaos and surprise instead of organized tactics. Behind them came Dr. Julie Kim's electronic warfare ships, broadcasting confusion signals that turned the Void Swarm's coordination into chaos. The battle above Alteria Prime became the turning point of the war. The Coalition fleet fought bravely but was being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Then the humans arrived and everything changed. Captain Morrison's ships didn't engage the enemy directly. Instead, they used the tactics that had served them well during the defense of Earth. They struck from unexpected angles, used the planet's gravity well as a weapon, and turned space debris into kinetic missiles. Target their command ships, Morrison ordered. Make them think with individual brains instead of a hive mind. Chief Engineer Katie Walsh had spent months perfecting her electromagnetic pulse weapons. When they fired, entire Void Swarm formations went dark as their quantum communication systems overloaded. Without their hive mind coordination, the alien ships became confused and vulnerable. On the planet's surface, Altarian ground forces were being pushed back by waves of crystalline warriors. Then Rick Carter's Marines landed, bringing with them the brutal fighting techniques they had learned on Earth. "Remember, boys and girls," Carter told his troops as they jumped from their dropships, "these things expect enemies who fight by the rules. We're going to disappoint them." The Marines used urban warfare tactics in Altaria's crystal cities. They turned every building into a fortress and every street into a killing ground. The Void Swarm warriors, used to overwhelming enemies with superior numbers, found themselves fighting an enemy that got more dangerous when cornered. Private Tony Adams crouched behind a barricade made from wrecked alien vehicles. His squad had been fighting for 6 hours straight, and they were running low on ammunition. But they were still human, and humans didn't know how to quit. "Contact left," shouted Sergeant Roy Mitchell, firing at a group of crystal warriors advancing down the street. Tony aimed carefully and fired. His bullet struck the alien's core structure, and the creature shattered like glass. It was a trick the Marines had learned during the Long War. Void Swarm warriors were tough, but they had weak points if you knew where to look. In space, the battle was reaching its climax. The Coalition fleet was battered but still fighting. The human ships darted through the chaos like sharks, striking at enemy weak points and disappearing before the aliens could respond. Dr. Amy Clark worked frantically in a field hospital set up in Altaria's government district. She was treating wounded Coalition soldiers alongside human Marines, and the differences were striking. The aliens were brave fighters, but they broke when their injuries became severe. Humans kept fighting until they physically couldn't move. "How do they do it?" asked Dr. Veltar, an Altarian physician watching Amy work on a Marine with multiple wounds. "They come from a world that tried to kill them every day for millions of years," Amy replied. "Injecting the Marine with painkillers, their bodies learned to keep working no matter what." The Marine, whose name tag read Collins, opened his eyes and tried to sit up. "Doc, I need to get back to my unit." "You have 3 broken ribs and a concussion," Amy told him. "You need to rest," Collins laughed weakly. "Doc, I've fought with worse. My squad needs me." It was a perfect example of the human mindset that had won the war. Other species fought until they were hurt. Humans fought until they were dead, and sometimes a little longer. The turning point came when Admiral Morrison executed the most daring maneuver of the war. Instead of attacking the Void Swarm fleet directly, he targeted their massive mothership, a vessel the size of a small moon that served as the enemy's command center. "All ships, prepare for ramming speed," Morrison ordered. His crew looked at him with expressions of awe and terror. They had followed him through impossible battles, but this seemed suicidal even by human standards. "Sir," said Communications Officer Dan Moore, "the mothership's shields will destroy us before we get close." Morrison smiled grimly. "Not if we don't give them a chance to fire." All ships execute pattern insanity. Pattern insanity was a tactic that no sane military would have attempted. The human ships accelerated toward the mothership from every direction at once, weaving through space in seemingly random patterns. The Void Swarm defenders couldn't predict where to aim, because there was no pattern to predict. Pilot Grace Sullivan led the attack in her fighter, diving through defensive fire that should have destroyed her a dozen times. Her ship was shot full of holes, but she kept flying because that's what humans did. When her weapon systems failed, she prepared to ram. "This is for Earth," she said, echoing the words that had become humanity's battle cry. But at the last moment, she pulled up as Katie Walsh's electronic warfare burst overloaded the mothership's defenses. Instead of dying in a kamikaze attack, Grace watched as the massive alien vessel's systems cascaded into failure. The mothership's destruction sent shockwaves through the entire Void Swarm fleet. Without their central coordination, the alien ships began to retreat. For the first time in a million years, the Void Swarm had been defeated in direct combat. Admiral Lisa Banks stood in the Coalition Command Center, watching the tactical display show enemy ships fleeing the system. Around her, Altarian officers were cheering, but she was thinking about the humans who had saved them. "They came back," she said quietly to herself. "We abandoned them, and they came back to save us." Fleet Commander Zarthul approached her, his expression humbled. "Admiral Banks, the Coalition Council wants to speak with Admiral Morrison. They wish to offer humanity full membership and leadership positions in our military." Lisa nodded, but she wondered if the humans would accept. They had learned to depend on themselves during the dark months of abandonment. They had become something new, something harder and more independent than the species that had once begged for coalition membership. On the surface of Altaria Prime, Colonel Carter stood in the ruins of what had been a Void Swarm command post. His Marines were cleaning their weapons and counting their dead. They had won, but the cost had been high. "Sir," said Sergeant Mitchell, "what happens now?" Carter looked up at the sky, where human ships were regrouping after the battle. "Now we go home. We rebuild, and we make sure this never happens again." The war was over, but its effects would last forever. Humanity had proven that they belonged in the galaxy, not as junior partners, but as equals. They had shown that sometimes the species everyone writes off is the one that saves everyone else. 3 months later, Admiral Morrison stood before the Coalition Council, listening to their formal apology and their offer of full membership. The alien leaders spoke of humanity's courage, their tactical brilliance, and their unwavering determination. Morrison listened politely, then gave his reply. "The Coalition abandoned Earth when we needed help. We survived because we learned to depend on ourselves. We'll work with you as equals, but we'll never again put our survival in someone else's hands." It was a new era for humanity in the galaxy. The species that had been called primitive and expendable had become the galaxy's most respected warriors. The term Deathworlder was no longer an insult but a badge of honor, and in the far reaches of space where new dangers waited in the darkness, human colonies continued to expand. They carried with them the hard-won knowledge that sometimes being abandoned was the best.